Since the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm going to talk about this briefly, there was a shift. I have never seen such a shift with such speed that happened. The class that I attended, the first class in 2020, was all about pushing the safety of and efficacy of what has been rolled out. It's a major red flag because they gave us words to use when we speak with our patients of what is acceptable to say and what is not acceptable to say. So there was absolute programming that was coming in for pharmacists of what pharmacists should and should not speak about. There was no data given of, is it safe? Is it not safe? How can something be safe if we don't have years of studies to see what happens long term, right? And as we all know now, there's many medications that are being pulled off the market years after they've been released because they're not safe.
You are listening to the Aligned and Alive podcast with Chrissy May, where we discuss the various aspects of spirituality and wellness. A place where you can find guidance and a space to explore your life's meaning and purpose, allowing you to become connected, aligned, and feeling fully alive. Welcome back, all you beautiful souls. I'm Chrissy May, your host of Aligned and Alive. And joining me today is a woman that radiates love and light. She is the founder of Wholistic Inc., a #1 Amazon bestseller in holistic medicine, world-renowned holistic teacher, clinical pharmacist, diplomat in anti-aging, functional regenerative medicine, award-winning natural perfumer, and creator of the Holistic Wisdom Program and Masterclass, which have helped thousands of people all over the world harness their inner healing power to end their struggles with chronic illness once and for all. It's an honor to sit and share in conversation today with Elena Bensonoff. Welcome.
Thank you, Chrissy. It's so nice to be here with you.
Oh, it's so nice to finally speak with you face to face. You radiate love, light, just this angelic aura that I've always been drawn to. I think I found you, 5 years ago, somewhere in there. But it's been so wonderful to experience your journey and your work. Your work is just remarkable. It's beautiful and it's powerful. So it's an honor to have you sit with me today and for all of our viewers and listeners to share in your story, your experience, and just your wisdom.
Thank you so much.
I've listened to your story and it's powerful, where you came from and over here and overcoming even bullying at a young age. And just, I can only imagine that played a part in your awakening your own inner healer and tapping into your power and just navigating a new life here as a young girl.
Thank you. Wow. You did listen to that interview because I will not disclose the bullying part too often, but I believe that every single one of us is born connected and knowing, and then life happens. Most human beings tend to disconnect in many ways from our true essence, our core essence, which is we feel, we know, we connected and tuned in. As you mentioned, I grew up in the former Soviet Union and I moved to the United States when I was a teenager with my parents. So there's definitely a lot of adversity that I went through. But as a little child, as a little girl, I was always extremely sensitive. And I had a lot of food allergies. I had a lot of ear infections and bronchitis and pneumonia. So I was also sick as a child. And I think my parents did the best that they could in supporting me with some of the limitations of what they believed was a healthy lifestyle, right? They put me into sports, which I think was a great thing as a child, going into sports that definitely boosted my immune system and created, I would say, an environment of structure, big time structure, especially the Soviet sports, of doing that, and ultimate commitment, learning commitment to oneself. Somewhere along the way, I knew I wanted to be in medicine. So when I came to the United States, I actually have no idea why I decided to go into pharmacy. I can tell you one thing. I didn't want to touch people. I was always afraid of needles. That was one thing, because my grandmother was a dentist. My great-grandfather was an OBGYN. And then my aunt was a pediatrician. So there was a lot of medicine that was around me. And actually, my great-grandmother was one of the first pharmacists in 1914 during Tsar periods. I always thought, wow, she was so educated and she was like a go-getter. So that, I guess, played out as far as the inspiration from me. And I remember walking by old pharmacies in the former Soviet Union and just as a child peeking through the window, watching the pharmacist weighing things. And I thought, wow, they're mixing some kind of magical potions. I want to do that. I want to find a cure for whatever it is, like if my loved ones ever got sick. So that was part of my imagination as a child and the environment that I was in. And then coming to United States, of course, I had to learn how to speak English. I made a decision, I'll go into medicine, but I thought I was going into the clean medicine. I wasn't going to have needles and touching people. My grandmother was like, well, maybe you should go into the dentistry like I did. I was like, I can't imagine being in somebody's mouth all day long. Mm-hmm. What I imagined pharmacy world to be was very different than what I experienced once I graduated pharmacy school. There was an absolute disconnect of having this body, mind, and soul. It was very much driven by chemistry, which I think is great. But later on, I realized it was very much, and it is now more than ever driven by the pharmaceutical industry. And initially, my idea was to learn about herbs and see how homeopathy can be incorporated, because that is the way I also grew up. And then very quickly, I realized that was not the reality. In fact, when I went into work at one of the diabetes clinics, most of the patients were on between 14 and 17 medications a day, which was like total shock for me. And I said, how is this possible? It's unbelievable. And for me, one of the roles that I played in the pharmacy at that time was managing the chronic conditions. And I was like, why am I managing? I don't want to manage. I want people off of the meds. But I would have to call and talk to patients about, emphysema or chronic COPD, blood pressure, diabetes. And it's like the more medication the person is on, the more chronically ill they become. Okay. And I would say, has anybody talked to you about the diet? Oh, no, my doctor said, this was back in 2007, that the diet is not related to my condition. Quickly realized there was this massive disconnect between what is really happening in our physical body, how our environment plays a role in our health, right, and wellness, and the reality of what is happening in the medical community. That big disconnect, right? Knowing that physicians also don't really study nutrition. They don't understand, or they're not giving that opportunity in medical schools, right? Or pharmacists or dentists. There's this massive disconnect in the system. So the system is failing. This was one of the number one things that I realized, the system is failing. I met a friend of mine who was a physician in 2007. She said, Elena, I'm going to attend American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. Would you like to come to this program with me? And I said, well, I have 4 kids. I don't know if I'm interested in going back to school. She's like, well, you don't have to sign up for or commit yourself to years of learning, but just attend this one module and see what you think. And I said, okay. And that was like massive, massive awakening for me. And going previously into, I didn't mention how severely asthmatic I was years before that. So I had a lot of lung damage. We lived in a house that was filled with mold. I went to the doctor and I remember he told me in my 20s that I was going to be on 6 medications for the rest of my life. And my lungs at that time were less than 25% working, which is really scary when you can't breathe in or out. And I said to myself, I'm not going to be on those meds. So I changed my lifestyle, my diet. I knew that will have absolute implication in the outcome of what happens to me later down the road. So moving forward to 2007, we go into this module and one of the cardiologists had us get up. His name was Dr. Sinatra. And he said in the beginning of the class, we are going to practice Qigong. I remember looking at my friend. I said, I don't know what he's talking about. I was very linear, trained. Qigong. I'm like, have you heard of it? She's like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, well, I don't know what it is. And he had us rub our hands. It was an audience probably of 300 people. And I remember rubbing my hands. And then he said, well, let's feel the energy between our hands. Voila. Yes. The energy flowing between my hands. And I said, do you feel that? She's like, I think so. Like, oh my God, whatever it is, we have to do this. So I came back home to Tampa, Florida, and we found a Qigong teacher. For the next 2 years, we made a commitment to meeting every Friday and doing Qigong. So that was so life-changing. And I was so hungry for more learning because I think once this aha moment happens, there's no turning back. I don't care how linearly trained we all are. Something magical happened. And this is when I signed up for Ayurvedic medicine. I took a year, private classes with a teacher. Her name was Light Miller. She passed away couple of years ago. She was amazing, very much instrumental in where I am today. So it was a combination of the functional medicine training for a few years, fully committed to that, Ayurveda, energy medicine, and then recognizing everything is connected. I also went and worked in a compounding pharmacy. I don't know. Do you know what compounding pharmacy is?
Compounded? No.
Compounding. So compounding pharmacies, it's probably, if you've ever had a prescription that needed to be custom made for you, most likely it's a compounding pharmacy that makes it, like hormone creams or like progesterone and things like that. So I went to work there and I thought, oh, maybe this will remind me a little bit of that child in me that wanted to mix the magical potions, right? But I quickly also realized I enjoyed it, but there was a lot of toxicity that was happening. You know, I had a lab call me. This was at the time where the compounding pharmacies were not very regulated. And I was mixing hormone creams and thyroid capsules and all kinds of things. And a lab called me because I did a blood test. I wanted to know what my hormone level was for estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, all of that, just to see, right? Because I was part of that system of training and I wanted to look into my own stuff. Well, the lab called me and they said, can we talk to you? What is it exactly that you're doing? I'm like, why? What's happening? And they said, we've never seen results that are that high. Are you like eating hormones by spoons? I was like, what do you mean? I said, and I work in a compounding pharmacy. And they said, well, you have toxic levels. And that was shocking to me. This was my huge aha moment. Because first of all, I was mixing creams because when you apply products topically, you know, high amount of it is absorbed versus taking something orally. Let's say if you take progesterone orally, less than 10% is absorbed because it has to be broken down by the digestive system versus applying something topically, you know, instead of 200 milligrams oral, let's say progesterone, you would need 20 milligrams of topical, right? Because you need a lot smaller dose. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm absorbing everything I'm making, which is really frightening. I started to pay attention to the labels. And I remember pulling a raw ingredient, a raw bottle, and it said BHT, which is butylated hydroxytoluene. And it said on the label, hepatotoxic, which is liver toxic, and it had skull and bones on it. And I was like, wait a minute, this is the ingredient I'm putting into skincare products, into topical hormone creams. Light bulb again went off in me. And I'm like, oh my God, let me go home and see what is in my products that I'm using, right? And this is the most interesting thing because when I started on this journey, this was not a thing. Like now a lot of people are talking about it. Oh, did you see the ingredient here? That, well, as pharmacists, we weren't trained to even read the labels, right? Most physicians are not trained to read labels. Most consumers are not trained to read labels. Well, I came home and ended up throwing away most of the products I had because not only did they have BHT, they'd had PEGs, polyethylene glycol, which is also toxic, parabens, different types of parabens, right, which are in skincare products, prescription pills and over-the-counter pills, which is crazy. BHT is found in canned food. It's a preservative. I just recently looked into donuts. Like somebody, one of my clients said, oh, I just had donuts. I'm like, oh. So I Googled to see what's in the donuts. There's like BHT in the donut as a preservative. I'm like, oh my God. So Europe has different regulations than United States. So this is also important to mention. So anyway, I know that you mentioned that I'm a natural perfumer. And if you don't mind, I'll share the story.
I was going to ask you. Yes, please.
So what happened once I discovered all the toxicities I was mixing into the products unknowingly, because this is part of what happens in the compounding world, what happens in a pharmaceutical world. I said I wanted to create a natural skincare company. So I ended up compounding and creating my own line, which is no longer available online just because there's too many things to do. And I didn't have time to maintain it. But my company at the time became one of the companies that was recommended by the Environmental Working Group. So if anyone is ever interested in looking up ingredients as far as safety, toxicity, people go on ewg.org, it's a great resource to look those things up.
That's great.
So when I was invited by a friend of mine who is a physician, she said, Elena, could you do a presentation on toxic ingredients and really how it impacts our system? I said, yeah, I'll be happy to, since I've been in this field now for a couple of years of really diving into the ingredients. And one of the ingredients was fragrance. So somebody raised the hand in the audience. It was an audience of probably 65 people. This particular woman said, well, do you know of natural perfume companies that you can recommend? That was one of the answers I had no answer to. One of the questions I had no answer to. And I said, it's a great question. I don't know, but I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
So not only did I decide to find out, I actually decided to study natural perfumery. And I became a natural perfumer because I guess mixing alchemy is part of my gift. And, oftentimes we don't realize what our gifts are. And we tend to think that being creative is one thing or the other. I actually never thought of myself as being creative. I thought you have to be on stage, you have to write poetry, sing, act, something like that makes you creative. I never imagined that being a logical person would make you creative. Well, going into the world of perfumery and into the world of energy is when you recognize that when you go into the flow state. So yes, there's basics and formulas that you learn, right? How ingredients interact. And I'm talking about natural ingredients, because there's a lot of perfume brands on the market that claim they have natural ingredients, but they actually use a lot of synthetics as well. So when you learn the basics and then you allow to become a vessel, it's like a composer who's composing music, right? Channeling the music. This is exactly what happens. And I remember creating my first formula, and I attended my class and I asked my teacher, what do you think? She said, I said, how long will it take to be a good perfumer? She said, normally it takes 10 years. And I said, I think I created something really good. And she critiqued the fragrance that I created, my first one. And she said, wow, this is really good. So that was just kind of like my invitation to trust that process.
Oh.
So as a result of it, I've created 6 natural fragrances. I've created many for private clients as well. So that's my creative aspect that I don't talk about often.
I love that. And it goes back to you wanting to create your potions, your magical potions. It just came in a different form.
What I wanted to do then is have my own consulting business looking into the core root of why people are sick, right? So now I knew, okay, I've finished my fellowship in functional medicine and regenerative medicine. I've done energy, studied energy, Ayurveda. I wanted to understand, okay, I'm seeing the blood work, I'm seeing saliva tests, but sometimes they're not aligned with what the person is feeling. Is there another system of testing a person and finding out how we can get to the root core of what is going on with a person in order to prevent the chronic conditions, right, from occurring? And yes, as a result of my inquiry, as a result of working with many, many, many people over the years, I've come up with a system, which is the holistic quantum system, where I teach actually medical providers or those that are not in medicine and they just want to learn, how do you test a person and find out on the spot exactly what is happening in the person's physical system.
This is great information. Can you give us just an overall, overview of what that looks like?
So there's 2 parts to my training. Part 1 is energy, because we cannot neglect the energy. There's one of the things I learned, because at first I wanted to just do energy work. I thought, this is going to be the path. I don't want to incorporate anything to do with my medical background. And I've actually went into a path of rejecting medicine, rejecting what I've learned. And then I quickly realized that just doing energy work is creating massive, massive imbalance, because oftentimes people will have very specific physical things going on. Let's just talk about diet, right? So dietary inflammatory processes. Right. I would need to know, okay, how do I test and find out what exactly that person is sensitive to that is contributing to the fire, the inflammation that is contributing to chronic symptoms? I've had people with sinus infections, cystic acne, bloating, gasiness, digestive issues, irritable bowel syndrome. What is creating it? Energy, just doing energy work is not going to help the person. So then I quickly said, okay, we have to incorporate everything that I've learned. And actually, true practitioners of the futures are the ones that are going to understand energy, medicine, and the vibration. I quickly realized that we cannot do one without the other. And this is the big disconnect that's happening in the world at the moment, right? So for me, it was like, okay, we have to marry and merge the two together. One cannot exist without the other. We cannot deny our energy aspect, because we're based on quantum physics. We're all energy in motion, right?
Yes.
And then there's physical part. So part one, I teach how to tune in into a person and how to read their physical energy system, right? Because there could be an imbalance on the left side. There's a pulse. I'm teaching people how to read pulses on the feet, how to distinguish between what does it mean if the energy is strong or weak, hot or cold, dense or soft. There's so many nuances to understanding when you're in the presence of another human being. What does their body or their energy field tell you about what is happening in their system? So knowing the energy aspect is very important, but then it's also extremely important to understand the body. So I teach people how to test different meridian systems based on the applied kinesiology. So a practitioner or anyone who wants to learn will be able to test liver, small intestine, large intestine, adrenal, kidneys, thymus gland, lymph, hypothalamus, pituitary gland. I mean, you name it, it can all be tested.
Is this mainly done through muscle testing or?
Yes, and touching meridian points.
Okay.
Yes, it is based on precision medicine, I believe, and I know that all of us are as unique as our fingerprints. So therefore, I always say there's never one diet. You will never hear me talk about one diet for everybody. You will never hear me advertise any kind of pills. And this is what I teach my students, that if you're going to recommend a product, any product to anyone, it has to be custom tested for that individual. Okay. Whether you are prescribing medication or you're prescribing an herbal product or homeopathy or a cleanse, whatever it might be, you need to know first what is happening in that person's system. Without knowing that, because we're living in so much information right now and everyone is pushing products. Okay. And this is where it's really dangerous. You want to have somebody on your side that understands how your body works, what is happening in your microbiome, which is, if you have a parasite, what kind of parasite do you have? Because before people go on cleanses, you want to know what the heck you're cleansing. If your liver is congested, why is it congested? Is it fungus? Is it bacteria? Is it candida? What kind is it? Based on the testing I teach, a person will be able to know exactly what is happening in the entire physical system, and then finding the right thing that will work to balance out the imbalance in the body. So in most cases, you see that people are doing really well.
Right.
If they stick to the regimen that is specific to them.
It's so fascinating. I had a strength conditioning coach many years ago. If you ever heard of him, Charles Poliquin, he would have us hold the supplement like in our hands. And then there were different methods. One of them I remember being was like, if you leaned back or forward, it would tell you, but your body would basically say, yeah, like reject it or accept it. Yes. So it's very fascinating. I believe in it.
I think that's a great method, but it's not enough, because if you're holding a supplement and let's say it's for your adrenals, you want to know what stage of adrenal fatigue you're in. Because there's 3 stages. And then you want to be able to test the right product for your adrenal. That means your adrenal has to be tested first. So it's much more complicated than just holding a product, because you need to know the very thing that's happening in your body.
Right. So you would add this addition to the obvious, which is full blood labs.
In some cases, yes. So if you want to see what your level of, let's say, estrogen, progesterone, your thyroid, you want to have a thyroid panel, right? Just testing thyroid is not enough using kinesiology, but once you find out what is happening in your blood work, let's say for your thyroid, if you're not converting, right, from T3 to T4, reverse T3, there's issues based on your decision as a practitioner. If you want to prescribe, let's say, a Nature-Throid product, a natural, or let's say Synthroid, some doctors prescribe Synthroid, you can actually learn to test and see if it's going to balance the TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3. So there is a way to test it also.
The full program for this is going to be the one you're hosting in Florida in 2 weeks?
Yes.
What this one's on? Okay.
Yes.
Gosh, I wish I could make it. Please do another one, because I'm there.
So I haven't decided for next year when. Yeah, this year I've done twice, but we'll make a decision when.
I will be there. I'm just much more fascinated by this lifestyle. Obviously, as I shared with you a while back, my mom's holistic, 17 I think, is when she introduced me to holistic medicine. I'm so grateful for a mom like that. I never had to grow up with, thinking medicines were okay. So I've been able to live mindset of curing the root cause as opposed to masking it. Do you feel there is a shift? Is just a collective? Because I feel there is, that people are seeking real answers now. They want the truth in many levels of life, right? Wanting to learn more, but then also asking the question, why does the United States have this structure of medicines, of toxic chemicals and elements in everything, processed foods, everything we eat? Is there a bigger agenda that you believe, which is why they are integrating all of that still? And even more so, I feel, at a higher level than ever before in our lives. And everywhere you turn, it's toxic chemicals in everything. So knowing what we know now, and a lot of people in that space do understand, one is to question, where is the integrity of all of this? And why aren't people making changes on a greater level?
It's a multifactorial question. So I'll say this. Years ago, I realized when I opened my private practice, which now it's all online, but when I did in person, people that were coming in were much more educated than the practitioners. And that is the shift that's happening right now. Is I think people, because of the internet, majority of those that do care tend to Google and look online and see, okay, what else is there? So they're coming in to see their medical providers, their physicians, practitioners, to see what do they think. Unfortunately, the medical system has to catch up, right? There's not enough of the movement of traditional medicine catching up. Do we need allopathic medicine? 100%. We can't disregard that and say we don't need it. God forbid somebody has heart attack, they break their leg. Say, God, we have emergency rooms where you can go and you can get this taken care of. Now, chronic conditions is a whole different story. And I will share this with you. In the last couple of years, because I have to take continuing education courses every single year because I have 2 licenses, right? The consultant and the regular pharmacist. So basically every year, it's a renewal for my license. Since the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm going to talk about this briefly, there was a shift. I have never seen such a shift with such speed that happened. The class that I attended, the first class in 2020, was all about pushing the safety of and efficacy of what has been rolled out. It's a major red flag because they gave us words to use when we speak with our patients of what is acceptable to say and what is not acceptable to say. So there was absolute programming that was coming in for pharmacists of what pharmacists should and should not speak about. There was no data given of, is it safe? Is it not safe? How can something be safe if we don't have years of studies to see what happens long term, right? And as we all know now, there's many medications that are being pulled off the market years after they've been released because they're not safe. Same thing we see with like topical products, topical ingredients like talc, right? You could see that. There's lawsuits now with Johnson & Johnson that's happening. So that was a major red flag. Now more than ever, in every continuing education program I'm seeing, it's like they've amped up how much they're promoting the drugs. I actually had to raise my hand in one of the last classes and say, why is it that we're promoting for type 2 diabetes and for high cholesterol or high triglycerides, I should say, why is it that we're promoting medications and not changing the lifestyle and the diet?
Thank you.
And they said, oh, yeah, that works too. What do you mean? Oh, yeah, that works too. But why is it that the first recommendation is prescribing medications and not changing the person's lifestyle and diet? So is there a change? Yes. Is the pharmaceutical company behind it, or all of them are behind it? Absolutely. Are there good guys in those industries? Absolutely, yes. There's plenty of good guys. But I think they're receiving a lot of pushback because there's no money in healthy lifestyle, healthy diet.
Exactly.
Right? We're not creating codependent, chronically ill individuals. So this is not in the best interest of the medical industry. So this is why we need educated, right? People have to get educated, learn as much as possible about how to take care of themselves and really become activists. for their own well-being.
Building awareness, I feel, is more important than ever before. And I do feel, as I mentioned, the shift, I do feel people demanding more answers. And especially with what we just all experienced these last few years. To me, it's an ethical play now. The work you do is so credible and so powerful. That's why I wanted to have you on. I wanted to share you with everyone I know, because the more leaders we have like yourself in this space, the faster we can all come together and really start building as one unit to change what's going on in our society.
Yes, I wanted to share a story actually that happened. And this is why I feel now more than ever like I have to fully step into my mission, which is teaching people how to be health advocates, to really learn how to tune in to what is happening, whether it's for yourself, your loved ones, or you have a medical practice, right? All of it is connected. My son got really sick in May. I don't know if you saw me post it. He was in the Coast Guard, still is, 24 years old. For 3 months, he didn't tell me how sick he was because he's not living, where I'm living. So he wasn't answering a phone. And I thought, as a mom, you have an intuition, something is just not right. And I kept calling and calling and calling. And then finally he called me. He's like, Mom, I'm not doing well. I'm really, really sick. I'm like, what's going on? So he shared with me, he was bleeding 30 times a day. He didn't tell me how much weight he lost. At first he said, I lost like maybe 20 pounds. I'm like, 20 pounds, turn on your camera and let me see you. He's like, I don't want you to see me. So then I said, go immediately to gastroenterologist. He didn't even tell me it was 30 times a day he was bleeding. He's like, when I'm going to the bathroom, I'm bleeding. And I'm sharing the story because it's an important story. So he went to a gastroenterologist and he called me. He said, well, they told me I have one of the worst cases of pancolitis. So there's ulcerative colitis, maybe some people have heard of, which is inflammation of the colon. He has pancolitis, which is inflammation and ulceration of the entire colon.
Oh my gosh.
So they gave him prednisone. He went home. And of course, he didn't tell the doctor he wasn't eating. Okay. Because he went Googling instead of calling me, Googling what he could eat. And the only thing he looked up that was okay to eat was applesauce. So this is also the danger of Googling and doing stuff on your own. For months, he was having applesauce, not sleeping for 3 months at all because he was on the toilet. And then prednisone, he couldn't keep it down. So he called me. He's like, I'm not doing well. I said, go check yourself go to the doctor again. He went and they admitted him to the hospital. And I drove from Tampa to Jacksonville, fastest 3.5-hour drive for me. So I walked into the emergency room. He's laying in this very dark room. I mean, it was frightening. Later, I found out he lost 65 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
65 pounds. It was really, and then he just broke down crying. He cried and we just sat in darkness. His room didn't even have windows. And I just thought, thank God I came, because he kept saying to me, don't come. I'm okay. Right. So it's also knowing to reach out to your loved ones, people who love you. So anyway, I sat there with him for a week in a hospital and it was silence. We were in silence for a week. He had no energy to even talk. He was on morphine, prednisone, 60 milligrams, and then all kinds of medications. And it was scary. And then it was trying to figure out how do we bring him home? Because the reason he couldn't come home is because he couldn't sit in the car without being on the toilet and bleeding out.
Oh my God.
So we couldn't get him on the plane. We had to rent an RV and bring him back. But while in the hospital, I was observing also what was happening, because they wanted to put him immediately on blood clotting agents. And I said that he doesn't need it. Then they wanted to put him on proton pump inhibitor. I said, why are you putting him on proton pump inhibitor? Well, they said it's part of the protocol. I said, explain the protocol. I said, no, he's not going to be on that. So they didn't. Twice they wanted to put him on antibiotics. And the first time, in the emergency room when I came in, and I said, okay, his gut is already a disaster. Why are we putting him on that? Well, we're suspecting there is a bacteria. I said, did you test the stool? They said, no, it's part of protocol. I said, no, let's hold until the stool shows something else. So the next 2 days, the stool samples came back. There was no bacteria. So we're on another floor. A new doctor comes in and says, okay, we're going to start him on antibiotics. I said, absolutely not, because we just looked. The stool sample doesn't have bacteria. And they said, oh yeah, we don't have to. So this is why I'm talking about this, because if, God forbid, one of our loved ones or you or me or anyone goes to the hospital and we're not in the condition to advocate for ourselves, right? We're that sick. It's important that we have somebody on our side that really cares and really knows. And for me, my biggest mission right now is to educate as many people as possible and say, here's what you can test. Even if you are not trained in medical school, even if you're not a pharmacist or dietitian, there's tools I can teach you, because there is no reason any of us has to suffer, number one. And my son suffered because, there's many things that happened. He was toxic. The work environment where he worked, right? There's emotional things that were going on. And of course, diet wasn't the best. He was on the ship for a couple of years, 6 months at a time at sea. You can only imagine what kind of diet he had, right?
Oh my gosh. I can't.
It's a combination of things. We've been rebuilding him since May, cell by cell. He's feeling better. But it's a frightening thing that we all went through as a family. And I don't wish it upon anybody. And this is why I think it's important that we all learn how to really take care of ourselves and prevent disasters from happening.
Thank you for sharing that story. I'm so happy to hear that he is healing, and thank God he has a mom like you that, can obviously ask those important questions. I'm looking forward to the Awaken Your Inner Healer course. I definitely am going to be a student and learn as much as I can and pass that on, pay it forward to others. Thank you for all the work you do. I'm so grateful to sit with you today and finally share a face-to-face conversation. And for those interested, I'm going to be putting in the show notes links to connect with Elena on social media, but more importantly through her wholisticinc.com or just holistic.com.
Holistic.com. Yeah.
Okay, very easy. And I'll put it on the screen. It's wholistic.com. And there you can see all the courses that she has to offer. There's so many fun assessments to take. I mean, it's just get playful with your healing journey. Then you can experience life as we're meant to here, right? With joy and bliss and abundance.
Yes. And one thing I want to say is now, especially over the last couple of years, what's happening around the world, there's many, many, many more people coming up that are chronically ill. And this is why it's important that we train people with all the right tools of what you can do, whether you're in the healing realm, being a healer, a dietitian, dentist, acupuncturist, you're a mom or you're a parent, or you just love human beings and you want to help. It's important to know that you are very needed right now on this planet, because we're walking into a complete disaster. A hurricane just went through for the last 2 years, whether people have had their injections or they had the actual virus that went through their bodies as a hurricane. It's important to know what to do next and how to rebuild our systems moving forward.
So well said. And I've seen it. And I know my holistic practitioner out here in Arizona said that she's never seen so many cases come through now with autoimmune disease and other stuff, especially in people that were very healthy these last few years. It's important, and it's, in my opinion, urgent to really start looking down a different avenue of living.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christy, so much for having me here.
Thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you next year in person. I'm sure you'll post a date here in the coming months of when that next course is going to be, but I will fly to Tampa and join you face to face.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Make it a beautiful weekend, and I will talk to you soon.